Charles Abernathy, a wealthy man, invites his children to his mansion for an urgent and highly sensitive matter. His children include Drew and his wife Hannah, who's actually Charles' daughter-in-law, CJ and Madeline, the fraternal twins, and finally the youngest daughter, Kami. A man named Miles Hartman, who is Abernathy's attorney, tells them to enter the mansion and get ready to meet their father as soon as possible. As they walk in, they're all puzzled as to why their father insisted on such an exclusive, private gathering and what this important matter could be. Finally, Charles Abernathy shows up. The first thing he says is to Drew, "This is a private matter. You didn't have to bring your wife." Though Hannah, seeing herself as part of the family, says that Charles is like a father to her. Then, as they all stand there, Charles drops the bombshell. He tells them he's going to die tonight. Shocked, his children immediately ask, "What? What are you talking about? You're perfectly healthy. How can you predict that you'll die tonight?" But Charles calmly explains that some people are planning to kill him tonight. However, he intends to survive, which is why he has gathered them, to protect him and make sure he doesn't die. He goes on to say that he still has a lot to live for, even at 75, and has unfinished business. He then warns them that if they fail to protect him and let him die, they will all be disinherited. He's already arranged with Hartman that in the event of his death, all his wealth and assets will automatically be donated to a charity. Then he turns to Hartman and tells him to come back in the morning, hoping that he'll still be alive and everything will be fine. After that, he looks back at his children and says, "Tonight's going to be tough. You better be prepared." With that, he seals and locks the doors. Kami, the curious daughter, wanders down to the mansion's basement, which is packed with expensive vintage alcohol and wine. As she's browsing, trying to decide which bottle to take, she suddenly hears a strange noise. She calls out, "Who's there? Is someone here?" The noise grows louder, and in a panic, she bolts for the stairs. Just before CJ can open the door for her, she sees the shadow of something strange cast on the wall, scaring her even more. In another scene, CJ is playing billiards when his glass of wine mysteriously falls off the table, leaving him baffled and unsettled. Later that night, the Abernathy kids gather to figure out how to handle the eerie situation. Madeline thinks the whole thing could be a setup. Maybe their father is just trying to trick them and cut them out of the inheritance. But Hannah, the daughter-in-law, believes that someone might really be out to kill Charles, and they should be prepared. Drew and Hannah catch Charles in the hallway just before he's about to head into his safe room and ask him to explain more about the threat. He replies, "Like I said, tonight someone's going to try to kill me." He goes on to reveal that years ago, he made a deal that cost someone their life, and now the consequences of that deal are catching up to him. The Abernathy siblings meet again and tell each other to be careful and, if necessary, arm themselves for protection. In a later scene, Kami is by the pool at midnight, live streaming and chatting with her fans just before she's about to get in the water. Suddenly, through her phone's camera, she spots a strange figure standing by the wall. But when she turns to look and shines her phone's light in that direction, she sees nothing and brushes it off, thinking her mind is playing tricks on her. She gets ready to enter the pool and dips her foot in the water, but out of nowhere, some unseen, terrifying force grabs her from behind. All we can see are Kami's legs frantically kicking as she's dragged into the pool. in a horrifying and mysterious way, she's killed, suffering a brutal head injury in the process. Everyone rushes to the pool and pulls Kami's cold, lifeless body out of the water. They're all in shock and grief, realizing that the threat their father warned them about is very real. They inform Charles about what happened, and he stands over his daughter's body, filled with regret. He says it's all his fault for making such a terrible mistake years ago, and now his children are paying the price. As the siblings start thinking about how Kami's share of the inheritance might be divided among them, Charles turns to Hannah and says, "Since I'm like a father to you, you're my daughter too. I'll give Kami's share to you." Charles then shows them a special way to knock on his door, so he can trust them and know it's them if they come to see him later. He wishes them luck before they leave. As they're heading back, Madeline and CJ accuse Drew and Hannah in the hallway, saying they might have killed Kami themselves to get her share of the inheritance. It's a baseless, ridiculous accusation that deeply offends Drew and Hannah. Later, when Hannah and Drew are alone in their room, Hannah tells him, "I don't care about the money. I'm done with your siblings and their scheming. They're just trying to pin everything on us. Our lives are at risk. Let's get out of here, screw the money, screw all of it." With that, Hannah and Drew decide to make a break for it. They try to escape through Charles' so-called museum, which is full of priceless statues and paintings, hoping to find a way out. Meanwhile, Madeline and CJ, the twin siblings, are talking, and they start to believe that Drew and Hannah are the real danger. They think that if they can stop them, the threat looming over the night will be easier to handle. So they begin plotting their next move. Hannah and Drew reach the back of the room, where the exit is chained shut. Drew manages to pry the door open just enough for Hannah, who's slimmer, to squeeze through. But suddenly, some strange force starts pushing Hannah back with intense pressure, and Drew has to pull her back inside. Then, out of nowhere, they notice that all the statues in the room have turned to face them, standing still but eerily staring. Terrified, they try to run, but just as they're about to flee, the lights go out, plunging the room into darkness. Panicking, they start running blindly in the dark. But chaos breaks out as it seems some evil force is trying to stop them. Objects start falling from above, and the statues block their path. Despite the madness, they manage to escape, and just before they shut the door, they see a demonic figure materialize in the room. They rush to Charles' room and knock exactly as he instructed. To their shock, he doesn't open the door. Frustrated, they notice a large door ahead, which turns out to be a vault. Out of curiosity, they enter, but suddenly, the vault door slams shut behind them. Standing outside, locking them in, are none other than Madeline and her twin brother, CJ, who are intentionally trapping them to get rid of them. Inside the vault, Drew quickly realizes that the air supply is limited, and if they don't find a way out soon, they'll suffocate. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Madeline and CJ notice a shadow flickering on the wall, but as soon as they look, it vanishes. Madeline, being braver, moves toward the spot, but she finds nothing. Suddenly, an invisible, evil force grabs her by the neck and lifts her off the ground, choking her. CJ tries to save her, but the same sinister force pulls Madeline's legs from behind and drags her away, leaving CJ helpless. Charles hears the commotion but stays eerily calm and does nothing. Back in the vault, we see Drew and Hannah, their air running out. They're on the verge of suffocating, desperate for a way to escape as the oxygen dwindles to dangerous levels. Madeline wakes up on the floor of one of the rooms, dazed. She suddenly notices wet footprints and decides to follow them. They lead her to a painting of Kami, now depicted in a portrait. As Madeline touches the painting, blood starts dripping from Kami's head, and suddenly, the image of Kami transforms. Her face turns demonic, and she breaks out of the painting, lunging toward Madeline. With her mouth wide open, she spews a torrent of dirty water all over Madeline's face. Just then, CJ shows up, and the demonic spirit of Kami turns toward him. CJ fires his gun at Kami, but to his horror, he realizes that the bullet didn't hit Kami, it hit his sister, Madeline. She collapses and dies right in front of him. In shock, CJ stands up, determined to hunt down the evil force. But when he looks back, Madeline's body is mysteriously gone. Without wasting any time, CJ rushes to the vault and opens it, saving Drew and Hannah from suffocating inside. After freeing them, he tells them, "You two need to find a way out. I'm going to face my father. Because of his mistake, I've lost both of my sisters, and I only have one bullet left. I'm going to use it to kill this demon." CJ, armed and ready, walks into one of the rooms and starts checking every corner. Suddenly, something like blood splatters in the air, and he sees the demonic version of Kami again, but just as quickly as she appears, she vanishes. Out of nowhere, she reappears behind him and pushes him from a height, causing him to fall and lose consciousness. When CJ wakes up, he's barely able to move his arms and legs are broken. As he looks around, he sees his sisters, now fully transformed into demons. Madeline, in her new demonic form, walks down the stairs, embraces CJ, and then drains him like a piece of fruit, completely sucking the life out of him. Meanwhile, Drew and Hannah, terrified by the worsening situation and the flickering lights, rush into another room. They barricade the door with a heavy wooden dresser to keep themselves safe, while inside they find a library. By chance, they pick up a book, which reveals a hidden door behind the bookshelf. Inside the secret room, they discover all sorts of strange objects and books related to demon worship and summoning. They quickly leave the room, heading toward Charles, but the demons start closing in on them again. After a tense struggle, Charles finally opens the door and lets them in. Charles finally starts talking, revealing the dark truth. He explains that long ago, his father lost all his wealth and went bankrupt due to various problems. In his youth, desperate to restore the Abernathy family fortune, Charles made a deal with a demon. He even pulls out a statue of the demon to show them. He explains that the demon returned the family's wealth in exchange for a promise that when Charles turned 75, the demon would come for him and take his life. But then, Charles unveils an even darker secret. He confesses that he made a second deal with the demon. This time, the agreement was that the demon would spare Charles' life in exchange for killing his entire bloodline, including his children and grandchildren. In truth, Charles had set a trap for his kids, helping the demon kill them. After revealing this horrifying truth in a ruthless act, Charles pulls out a revolver and shoots his son Drew in the head, killing him instantly. He believes he's fulfilling the deal and that everything is going as planned. He then turns to Hannah and says, "I warned you to leave, but you didn't listen. Now you're a witness, and you have to die too." He shoots at her, grazing her arm, but Hannah manages to escape. Hannah quietly moves past him, hiding in a spot where she can see Charles' reflection on a shiny metal surface behind her, though she stays silent to avoid detection. However, Charles notices the trail of her blood on the floor and realizes where she is. When he goes to finish her off, Hannah has already fled. Hannah quickly runs downstairs and grabs CJ's gun, which only has one bullet left. Meanwhile, Charles follows her down the stairs. Knowing time is running out, it's almost midnight, the deadline for his deal with the demon. If he doesn't succeed in wiping out his entire bloodline, the deal will fail. As Charles searches for her, Hannah hides under a table, waiting for the right moment. When he walks by, she emerges, aims the gun at him, and fires the last bullet. The shot sends Charles flying backward into a large clock, and as he falls to the ground, the clock topples over onto him. His gun flies out of his hand. Desperate and now begging for his life, Charles watches as Hannah approaches. She reveals one final, devastating truth. She's pregnant with Drew's child, meaning a new member of the Abernathy bloodline is on the way. With only a minute left until midnight, Charles realizes he's failed. He didn't manage to kill his entire family, and his deal with the demon is broken. As the clock strikes midnight, the demon Charles made the deal with finally appears. Its monstrous mouth opens wide, and it devours Charles whole. Hannah sits quietly, looking at photos of her and Drew in her phone, mourning his loss as she waits for the morning to come. When dawn arrives, Miles Hartman, the family attorney, shows up as planned and opens the doors. Without a word, Hannah gets into the waiting car, her unborn child still alive inside her, the last true heir of the Abernathy family.